when a billionaire father quietly watches a humble librarian read to his disabled son. One simple moment sparks a life-changing journey of kindness, courage, and unexpected friendship. Clara had worked in the little town library for almost 7 years. It wasn't a grand building with marble floors or glass walls like the ones she'd seen in magazines. Instead, it was an old brick building that smelled faintly of paper and dust, with wooden shelves that creaked whenever you slid a book out. To most people, it was just another quiet place where books lived, but for Clara, it was home. She loved everything about it: the smell of the pages, the sound of a child giggling when they found a picture they liked, and the gentle rustle of turning pages when the world outside felt too loud. Every afternoon at 3 o'clock, Clara would push 2 small tables together in the children's corner, arrange a semicircle of tiny wooden chairs, and bring out a stack of colorful picture books. It was her favorite part of the day, reading hour. Children from nearby schools, toddlers holding their mothers' hands, and sometimes even curious grandparents would come to listen. Clara always gave each story life, changing her voice for different characters and adding little pauses for suspense. The children adored her for it. On a Tuesday afternoon, in early spring, Clara was setting up for a reading hour when she noticed the door open. In walked a man who didn't seem like the kind of person who usually came here. His suit was dark and perfectly pressed, his shoes shone like they'd just been polished. He carried himself with the kind of quiet confidence you couldn't fake. But what caught Clara's attention was the wheelchair he was pushing. Sitting in it was a boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old. With bright brown eyes and a gentle, shy smile, the boy looked around the library like he'd just stepped into another world. His small hands gripped the arms of the wheelchair, and his legs rested in braces. Clara guessed that he had some form of disability, though she didn't dwell on it. What mattered more to her was the way his eyes lit up when he saw the colorful covers in her stack of books. "Hello there," Clara said warmly, walking over. "Are you here for reading hour?" The boy looked at his father for a moment before nodding. His voice was soft but eager when he answered yes. "I'm Clara," she said, crouching down so she was at his eye level. "And you are?" "Ethan," he replied, smiling just a little more. "That's a wonderful name," Clara said, glancing up at the man behind him. "And you must be Ethan's dad?" "Yes," the man replied simply. His voice was calm, deep, and polite, but there was something guarded about it. "I'm Richard." "Well, welcome to both of you," Clara said, her tone as bright as ever. "We're just about to start. You can pick any seat you like. Or," she added, turning to Ethan, "you can sit right in the middle so you don't miss a thing." Ethan giggled softly, and Richard wheeled him closer to the front. The other children shuffled in, curious about the new boy, but too shy to say anything yet. Clara noticed how Ethan's eyes followed the pictures on the book covers as she began. She opened the first book, a funny story about a mischievous cat. Right from the start, Clara slipped into her animated reading voice. She made the cat's meows high and dramatic, gave the old lady in the story a squeaky voice, and pretended to trip over the words whenever the cat caused trouble. The children laughed, and even Ethan, who had been sitting quietly, let out a sudden laugh that made Richard glance down at him with surprise. Clara noticed it too. She made sure to look at Ethan often while she read, giving him little smiles as if to say, "I'm glad you're here." Every time she turned the page, she leaned forward so Ethan could see the pictures clearly. He was completely absorbed, his eyes darting from one illustration to the next, his mouth slightly open in concentration. Richard sat in the back corner, his hands folded, watching intently. He seemed to be studying not just the story but the way Clara told it, the way her voice softened when a character was sad, the way she paused for effect before something exciting happened, and the way she seemed to make every child in the room feel included. Clara didn't know anything about Richard beyond the fact that he was a father who clearly loved his son. She didn't notice the quality of his suit or the expensive watch on his wrist. She didn't know that he was the kind. A man whose name often appeared in business magazines, or that he owned companies all over the world. To her, he was just another parent who had brought his child to enjoy a story. When the reading ended, Clara closed the book and asked the children what they thought. Hands shot up all around. Ethan's hand didn't rise, but Clara noticed him, leaning forward, eager to say something. "What did you think, Ethan?" she asked gently. He hesitated, glancing at Richard again, then said, I liked the cat. But I liked the way you read it even more. You made it sound real. Clara's smile widened. Thank you, Ethan. That's the best compliment I could get. Richard helped Ethan wheel back a bit as the other children scattered. Clara stayed where she was, tidying up the books, but she noticed Ethan still looking at the stack. She picked up another book, this one about a boy who travels to space in his dreams. Do you like space stories? She asked him. Ethan's eyes lit up. Yes. Then maybe next time, we'll read this one together, Clara promised. Richard thanked her politely, and they left a few minutes later. Clara didn't expect to see them again. Sometimes people came once and never returned. But something about Ethan's smile stayed in her mind all evening. She thought about how carefully Richard had listened, and how the boy's laughter had sounded like it had been waiting for the right moment to escape. The next week, at exactly the same time, Clara looked up from arranging chairs and saw them again. Richard and Ethan right at the door. Ethan waved this time. Clara grinned and waved back. From that day on, it became a quiet routine. Every Tuesday afternoon, without fail, Richard would wheel Ethan into the library, and Ethan would claim the spot right at the front. Clara made sure to pick stories that she knew would make him smile. Adventures, silly tales, and sometimes ones that made him think. She noticed how his face would light up when she changed her voice or made sound effects. She noticed how Richard, though he stayed in the background, seemed more relaxed every week. What Clara didn't know was that Richard had never seen his son so animated in public before. Ethan was usually shy around strangers, especially adults, and didn't speak much. But in Clara's reading hour, something was different. Here, he wasn't the boy in the wheelchair. He was just another child, laughing at the cat who couldn't stop stealing fish, gasping when the hero fell into a pit, clapping when the story ended well. Richard began to look forward to these visits as much as Ethan did, but he never said much to Clara beyond polite thank yous. She didn't press him for conversation. She was too focused on making sure Ethan enjoyed himself. And maybe that was why Richard liked coming back. Clara never treated them like a spectacle. She didn't fuss over Ethan's disability in a way that made it awkward. She didn't look at Richard as if she was trying to guess who he was or what he did. She simply welcomed them as she did everyone else. To Clara, it was just another part of her job, and the part she loved most. But to Richard, something much bigger was happening. Every week, he watched as this librarian, in her simple cardigan and scuffed shoes, gave his son something that money couldn't buy. And though Clara didn't know it yet, the man in the expensive suit sitting quietly in the corner was already thinking about how he could repay her for something she didn't even know she had given. In the weeks that followed, the little library in town became a place of routine comfort for Richard and Ethan. Every Tuesday afternoon, the bell above the door would chime, and there they were, Ethan in his wheelchair, his hands resting on the armrests, and Richard just behind him, quietly steering him toward the children's corner. Clara, who had begun to expect them, would greet them with the same warm smile each time, as if seeing them made her whole day better. It wasn't just politeness. Clara genuinely felt a little rush of happiness whenever they appeared. Ethan's presence had a certain energy, even though he was soft-spoken. His bright eyes seemed to notice everything: the colors of the book covers, the new posters she'd pinned to the walls, even the small seasonal decorations she'd like to place on the reading table. She began to notice that if she put something new in the corner, a paper snowflake, a tiny pumpkin, a vase of fresh flowers, Ethan would spot it instantly and point it out. Richard rarely spoke much during these visits, but Clara started picking up on the way he paid attention to every detail. He didn't just wheel Ethan in and then get lost in his phone like some parents she'd seen before. No, Richard stayed present, always watching his son, always listening to the story. It was as if these hours meant as much to him as they did. To Ethan, Clara had a habit of preparing books ahead of time for her little audience. But now, she found herself choosing one or two each week with Ethan in mind. If she'd noticed he enjoyed funny stories, she'd pick something with an outrageous plot that would make him laugh. If he'd liked a story with animals, she'd bring something new with talking foxes or mischievous dogs. And if she sensed he wanted something more thoughtful, she'd find a gentle story about friendship or courage. One Tuesday, she'd picked up a book about a young pirate who couldn't swim. It was a silly idea, but Clara knew it was perfect for Ethan. Sure enough, during the reading, she exaggerated the pirate's nervous splashes, pretending to choke on seawater while the other pirates in the story rolled their eyes. Ethan laughed so hard his shoulders shook, and Richard, sitting quietly in the back, smiled, not just the polite kind of smile, but the rare, real smile that softened his face. The more they came, the more Clara learned little things about Ethan. He loved space stories, anything with dragons and tales, where the smallest character turned out to be the hero. He liked when she gave each character a different voice, and he didn't mind if she acted a little ridiculous to make the story fun. She discovered that if she slowed her reading at the right moments, his eyes would grow wide in anticipation. And if she ended a chapter on a cliffhanger, he would lean forward and ask, "What happens next?" And Richard, well, he was harder to read. Sometimes he sat with his arms crossed, looking serious. But Clara noticed that when Ethan laughed, something shifted in him. His shoulders loosened, his eyes warmed. It was subtle, but she saw it. And although she didn't know him well, she sensed that these moments, these simple, story-filled hours, were doing something important for both father and son. One afternoon, after the other children had left, Ethan stayed behind a little longer, flipping through a book she had read that day. Clara knelt beside him and asked, "So which part did you like best?" Ethan tapped the page with a drawing of the pirate clinging to a barrel. This one, because even though he was scared, he still tried. "That's a good reason," Clara said. "Sometimes trying is braver than winning." Richard had been standing a few feet away, but he looked at Clara then, as if something she said had caught his attention. There was a faint look of surprise on his face, as though her words had landed deeper than she might have guessed. As the weeks turned into months, Ethan grew more comfortable with Clara. He started greeting her with a cheerful, "Hi, Miss Clara," whenever he came in. Sometimes he brought her little things, a drawing he'd made or a small origami figure he'd folded with his dad's help. Clara always made a big fuss over these gifts, placing them proudly on the desk behind the counter. Richard noticed how she did it, how she made Ethan feel valued without making it seem like pity. That mattered to him more than he could say. Too often people treated his son as if his disability defined him, but Clara treated Ethan as if the wheelchair was just a seat he happened to use, nothing more. She spoke to him directly, waited patiently for him to answer, never rushed him. Sometimes other parents at reading hour whispered to each other about Richard. They noticed the watch on his wrist, the expensive tailoring of his suit. A few even speculated quietly about who he was. Clara never joined in. In fact, she didn't seem to notice. She was far more interested in whether the children liked the day's story than in who sat in the corner. One chilly afternoon, after everyone else had left, Richard stayed behind. Ethan was in the children's corner, carefully choosing a book to borrow. Richard walked up to Clara, his voice low. "You're very good with him," he said. Clara looked up from the stack of books she was arranging. "Ethan's a wonderful kid. He makes it easy." Richard nodded, but his gaze lingered on her a moment longer, as though he wanted to say more. Then he simply said, "Thank you," and went to help his son. Clara watched them go, feeling a little curious. She'd seen parents grateful before, but there was something about the way he'd said it, quiet but heavy, like it carried more meaning than the words themselves. In truth, Richard was beginning to realize just how rare people like Clara were. He'd built his life in boardrooms and negotiations, surrounded by people who calculated value in numbers and profit margins. Here, in this modest library with its mismatched chairs and worn carpet, was a woman who measured value in smiles and laughter, and she gave it freely, without expecting anything in return. Ethan's progress, though small to an outsider, was huge to Richard, speaking up more, laughing in public, even initiating little conversations with other kids during reading hour. Richard could have taken his son to expensive therapy programs or elite schools, and he had, but none of them had sparked this kind of joy in him. Clara had without even trying. Still, Clara knew nothing about the man she saw every week. She didn't know the size of his bank account or the influence he held. To her, he was simply Ethan's dad, the one who sat quietly in the back, smiling whenever his son did. And maybe that was exactly why Richard kept coming back. In Clara's world, he wasn't a billionaire or a business icon. He was just a father, and Ethan was just a boy who loved stories, week after week. The bond between the three of them grew in quiet, unspoken ways. And though Clara didn't realize it yet, the kindness she gave so naturally was leaving a mark on Richard's heart, one that would soon change all of their lives in ways none of them could have imagined. It was a gray, rainy afternoon when Richard and Ethan came into the library again. The windows were misted from the cold outside, and raindrops tapped softly against the glass. Clara had already set up the chairs and chosen the day's story, a tale about a little boy who built a flying machine from scraps. She thought Ethan might like it, because he enjoyed stories where clever thinking solved problems. Ethan was in his usual spot at the front, his hands folded in his lap, watching as Clara began. The room was smaller today. Fewer children had come because of the weather. The atmosphere felt cozy, like they were all gathered in a safe corner away from the rain. Clara read with her usual energy, making the sound of the machine's wings flutter and the whoosh of the wind as it lifted into the air. Ethan smiled often, but his attention seemed quieter today, almost thoughtful. When the story ended, the children clapped softly, and Clara closed the book with a smile. Most of them left quickly, hurrying to their parents who were waiting with umbrellas, but Ethan lingered. He looked at Clara for a moment, then asked, "Miss Clara, do you have family here?" The question took her by surprise. She knelt down beside him and said gently, "No, not here. My parents passed away when I was younger, and I don't have brothers or sisters, so I suppose my family is the people I meet every day, like all of you here." Ethan's brow furrowed slightly, as if he was trying to understand. "So you live alone?" "Yes," Clara said with a small smile. "It's just me, but I have a little apartment not far from here, and I keep it full of books and plants. That way it doesn't feel too empty." A few steps away, watching their exchange, he didn't step in, but he heard every word. Something about the way she said it, without sadness, but also without pretending it didn't matter, stayed with him. Ethan seemed to think about it for a while before asking, "Do you get paid a lot for reading to us?" Clara laughed softly. "Not really. Librarians don't make a lot of money, Ethan, but it's enough to pay the bills most of the time." Richard's eyes shifted slightly. Most of the time. He didn't like the sound of that. Ethan, with the blunt honesty only a child could have, said, "You should get paid a lot. You're the best reader." "That's sweet of you," Clara said, ruffling his hair. "But I do this because I love it, not for the money." Richard said nothing then, but when they left the library that day, the words wouldn't leave his mind. He had assumed Clara worked here as part of a comfortable, steady life.
Right.
He hadn't considered that she might be struggling behind the scenes, eh? Week later, Richard happened to arrive early with Ethan and found Clara at the front desk. Was arranging a box of new children's books, or at least new to the library. He noticed the stickers on the covers didn't match the ones that library used. Curious, he asked, "Did the library get a new shipment?" Clara hesitated for just a second. "Oh, these. I actually bought them myself. The children's section budget is very small, so sometimes I bring in books I think the kids will like." Richard looked at her carefully. "You buy them yourself? Out of your own salary?" She gave a small shrug, as if it were nothing. "It's not a big deal. The kids deserve good stories. And honestly, sometimes I find these at thrift stores for a few dollars." She smiled as she placed another book on the shelf. Seeing their faces light up is worth more than the cost. Richard didn't reply right away. He knew enough about money to understand that even a few dollars here and there could add up for someone who wasn't earning much. And yet here she was, spending her own money to make other people's children happy, without telling anyone, without seeking recognition. Later that day, when Ethan was busy talking with another child, Richard quietly spoke to the head librarian. A kind but older woman named Mrs. Howard, he asked, as casually as he could. How long has Clara been working here? Oh, years, Mrs. Howard said warmly. She's one of the best we've ever had. The kids adore her. And how is she doing? I mean, financially. Mrs. Howard's smile faltered slightly, as though she wasn't sure how much to say. Well, it's no secret librarians aren't paid much. Clara works part-time here, and I believe she does some evening shifts at a little cafe downtown to make ends meet. She's independent, never complains. But I do worry about her sometimes. Richard's brow furrowed. She still spends her own money on the library. Mrs. Howard nodded. Yes, I've told her she doesn't have to, but she says, the children's section is too important to let it go without fresh stories. She's got such a giving heart, that one. Richard thanked her and didn't ask more. But inside, he felt something shift. He had always believed you could measure someone's character by how they treated people who could do nothing for them. Clara had been giving her time, energy, and even her own limited resources to children who weren't hers, without expecting anything back. The following Tuesday, Richard found himself paying more attention than usual to Clara as she read. He noticed the slight wear on her shoes, the way her sweater cuffs were a little frayed, the careful way she handled each book as if it were precious. None of it made her seem less. In fact, it made her more remarkable to him. She wasn't rich in money, but she was rich in something far rarer. Generosity, Ethan. Oblivious to the thoughts running through his father's mind, was as happy as ever, laughing at the day's story about a clumsy wizard. Clara laughed with him, and for a moment, the whole library felt lighter. That evening, after he had put Ethan to bed, Richard sat in his study, staring at the rain against the window. He had the means to change lives with a single decision. He'd done it many times in business, but this was different. This wasn't about investment or profit. This was about gratitude, about seeing someone give so much without having much to give, and slowly an idea began to take shape. He didn't know exactly how yet, but he knew he wasn't going to stand by and let Clara keep carrying this quiet burden alone. After many weeks of quiet observation and growing respect, Richard felt a strong desire to help Clara in a way that truly mattered. He had watched her dedicate herself to the children in the library, giving them stories and laughter even when her own life was not easy. Her kindness was pure and genuine, something rare in his world of deals and money. Now, he wanted to do something that would change her life forever. One chilly morning, Richard came to the library earlier than usual. The sun was still low, and the air had a crisp freshness. Clara was already there, arranging the shelves with careful hands, as always focused and patient. When she saw him, she smiled warmly, but with her usual modesty, not knowing why he had arrived so early. "Good morning, Richard," she said quietly, "and good to see you, Ethan." Ethan waved shyly from his wheelchair, looking at the books, stacked nearby, ready for their usual story time. Richard cleared his throat, feeling a bit nervous in a way he rarely did. "Clara, I wanted to talk to you about something important." Clara looked surprised but curious. She put down the book she was holding and gave him her full attention. "I've been thinking a lot about the work you do here," Richard began slowly. "The way you care for the children, the way you bring joy to Ethan and others. I see how much you give your time, your energy, even your own money." Clara's eyes widened slightly and she shook her head. "Richard, it's nothing. I do it because I love it." "No, it's not nothing," he said gently but firmly. "It's everything. It means a lot, more than you realize." He took a deep breath. "I want to help you, not just with a small thing or a one-time gift, but to make sure you never have to struggle again. To give you the freedom to focus on what you love without worry." Clara's face showed a mix of shock and disbelief. She opened her mouth, but then closed it again. Clearly unsure how to respond, Richard continued, "I want to offer you a full-time position here with a proper salary that reflects how valuable you are. And beyond that, I want to help with your living situation. I want to make sure you have a safe, comfortable home." Clara looked down, her hands trembling slightly. "Richard, I can't accept that. I'm just a librarian. I don't deserve." I don't want to be a charity case. It's not charity, Richard said quietly. It's respect. You've earned it with every story you read, every smile you've shared. Please think about it. I want to support you, not out of pity, but because you matter. Ethan had been listening silently, and now he spoke up with his sweet voice. Miss Clara, you're the best. You should be happy too. Clara looked at Ethan and smiled softly, then back at Richard. After a moment, she nodded slowly. I'll think about it. Thank you. Richard felt a wave of relief. This was only the beginning, but it was a start. Over the next few days, he began making arrangements. He spoke to the library board, offering to increase their budget for the Omit Children's section and to create a special fund to support Clara's work and the library's needs. Clara, meanwhile, was overwhelmed but grateful. The idea that someone saw her not just as a quiet worker in a small town, but as someone important, touched her deeply. She started to imagine what life might be like without financial worry. No more counting pennies, no more second jobs. Just time to do what she loved. As the weeks passed, Richard and Clara's relationship grew stronger, but it remained rooted in respect and genuine care. They shared coffee sometimes, talking about books, about children, about dreams. Richard learned about Clara's life, her love for plants, her small garden at home, the letters she wrote to her late parents every year. Clara learned about Richard's world too, the challenges of being a single father, the pressure of business decisions, the loneliness that success sometimes brought. One day, Richard surprised Clara by inviting her and Ethan to a special event, a new community center opening that he had helped fund. It was a beautiful place, filled with light and space for children to play and learn. He told her it was part of a larger plan to invest in the town, to bring better opportunities to families like theirs. Clara was touched by the gesture, but also humbled. She had never imagined such kindness coming her way. At the event, as Clara watched Ethan run and play with other children, she felt a deep sense of hope. For the first time in a long time, she believed that life could be different. That her small acts of kindness had not gone unnoticed, that there was a future waiting, bright and full of promise. Richard, standing beside her, knew he had made the right choice. Helping Clara was more than an act of generosity, was a way to honor the humanity they both shared, to build a bond that money alone could never buy. From that day forward, Clara's life began to change in many ways. She was able to focus fully on her passion for books and children. The library flourished with new programs and more visitors. Ethan thrived too, his confidence growing as he spent more time in a supportive, joyful environment. And Richard found something he hadn't expected: a friend, a partner in care, someone who reminded him of the true meaning of wealth. Together, they created a small but powerful community where kindness, hope, and stories were the greatest treasures of all. After Richard decided to help Clara, things began to change in ways that neither of them could have imagined. Clara's life, which had once been marked by quiet struggle and hidden sacrifices, transformed into something brighter and fuller. But the most beautiful part was how this change didn't just affect Clara. It touched everyone around her, especially Ethan and the children who came to the library every day. At first, Clara felt nervous about accepting the help. She had always been independent, proud even, and the thought of relying on someone else made her uneasy. But Richard's kindness was not about charity or pity. It was about respect, about seeing her worth. This understanding made it easier for Clara to open her heart and trust him. With Richard's support, Clara was offered a full-time job at the library, a role that recognized all the work she had been doing quietly for years. The library's children's section was renovated with new shelves, colorful murals, and a cozy reading corner that quickly became a favorite spot for kids. Richard also helped set up a fund so that Clara could buy new books and organize storytelling. Events regularly, Clara was overjoyed. For the first time, she didn't have to spend her own limited money on books or worry about making ends meet. She could focus entirely on the children and the stories she loved to share. The library became a lively, joyful place, full of laughter and imagination. Ethan's health had always been a concern for his father, but with Clara's constant care and Richard's ability to afford the best treatments, Ethan's condition improved. He started to participate more in the library activities, and his confidence grew day by day. The bond between Ethan and Clara became very special. She was more than a librarian. She was a friend, a mentor, and a source of hope. Richard often visited the library, watching as Clara read two groups of children or helped them pick out their favorite books. He admired her patience and warmth. One afternoon, Richard brought Ethan along with a group of his business friends to the library's storytelling event. The children's eyes sparkled as Clara animatedly read a tale about courage and kindness. Richard could see that the library was more than just a building. It was a place where dreams were nurtured and lives changed. The community noticed the difference too, where families began coming to the library, attracted by the new programs and the welcoming atmosphere. Clara started hosting workshops for parents about how to encourage reading at home. And soon, the library became a hub of learning and connection. One day, Clara received a letter from a local newspaper. A reporter wanted to write a story about her and the library's transformation. Clara was shy at first but agreed, hoping to inspire others. The article told of a humble librarian whose kindness and dedication, with a little help from a generous father and his son, had brought new life to a small town. The story touched many hearts. Donations poured in, allowing Clara to expand the library's collection even further. She organized special events for disabled children, making sure that every child felt included and loved. Richard and Clara's partnership became an example of what can happen when kindness meets opportunity. Richard learned that true success was not measured by money or power, but by the positive impact on people's lives. Clara learned that accepting help is not weakness, but sometimes the key to unlocking new possibilities. Ethan blossomed into a happy boy, surrounded by friends and stories that fed his imagination and spirit. The library was his second home, place where he felt valued and understood. Years passed, and Clara's influence continued to grow. She became a beloved figure in the town, not just as a librarian, but as a community leader who believed in the power of stories to heal, teach, and connect. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, Richard and Clara sat together. In the newly built community room of the library, Ethan was nearby, showing his drawings to a group of children. The room was filled with warmth, laughter, and the gentle turning of pages. Richard smiled and said, "You've done something wonderful here, Clara, more than I ever imagined." Clara looked at him, her eyes shining. "Couldn't have done it without you, Richard. But more importantly, I couldn't have done it without the children. They gave me purpose." Richard nodded. "Thank you for showing me what really matters." In that moment, they both understood that this story was not just about a billionaire dad or a humble librarian. It was about human connection. How one small act of kindness can ripple out and change countless lives. The library stood as a symbol of hope. A place where everyone, no matter their background or challenges, could find a story that touched their heart and a community that embraced them. And so, the story of the billionaire dad who watched a librarian read to his disabled son and changed. Her life forever became a beautiful truth that when we see each other's worth and come together with love and respect, we can create a better world, one story at a time.